herself, and she's going to talk about Ruth Snow Bowen, and I'm excited to hear this presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
And thank you, Sandy and the Bicentennial Committee for inviting me to do this. It really forced me to organize and clean things out of my attic. So I have to congratulate you for forcing me to do this. As she mentioned, I am a studio artist, and my studio is now on the 3rd floor of my home, which is at 44 Chaplain Street, across from the church. And I start my day in my studio with my hourglass. So I don't have any clocks or anything like that in my studio. And what I do is I just turn this hourglass over, and because this talk is going to be an hour, once the sand goes through, we're done, okay? So I have a lot of information on Ruth based on her diaries. And so what I did was, and I'm going to go through the process of how I received the diaries and where I am with my quilt making now based on after Ruth passed away. But so on the tables are printed out sheets of what is written in the diaries. Okay, so let's get started with just a brief history of quilt making. Although myths abound about America as the birthplace of quilt making, the first examples of quilting, wadding stuff between two pieces of cloth and then sewn together to fix the middle layer, dates back to ancient Egypt. Did you know that? Probably not. Nevertheless, America has been a rich depository for quilts. From 1820 on, printed fabrics appeared regularly in American quilts. The textiles most common in century quilts were cottons. More leisure time and manufactured textiles made it possible for quilting to flourish. From the 1880s through 1920, crazy quilts became popular in this country. Named for their random, serendipitous piecing, crazy quilts combine scraps of silk, velvet, satin, wool, cotton, linen, and brocade. The Depression made the sumptuousness of crazy quilts seem decadent and overly ornamental. Between 1940s and the 70s, quilting, with the exception of the Amish, went out of fashion. And the reason I'm targeting that is this is when the diaries were written. So the Ruth Snow Bowen diaries were written by her mother from 1934 to the early 1940s. So I also want you to think about Ruth as a young woman. She was 35 years old, making quilts, selling them throughout Connecticut. So she really had a business at her age. Even though so many of the pictures we see of Ruth are her as an older person at her quilt, she really had a vibrant quilt business going when she was in her 30s. Between the 1940s and the 1970s, quilting, with the exception of the Amish, went out of fashion. Women began entering the workforce during World War II, and the onset of modern leisure activities weakened most women's interest in quilting. That all began to change in 1971 when the Whitney Museum exhibition, Abstract Designs in American Quilts, altered attitudes towards quilting and galvanized the interest in treating the medium artistically. Dyeing fabric, making fabric with computer technology, and networking have encouraged contemporary quilters to broaden the boundaries of the medium in exciting ways. Today, as an art quilter, it challenges museum visitors as to what they expect to see in quilts. Quilts, according to some visitors, should be functional objects that build upon the classic pieced and applique bed covers of an early era. Art quilts, in many cases, build upon the tradition and at the same time make connections to current cultural, political, environmental, and technological developments. No longer relegated to the covers for beds, these recent works, which are more often meant for displaying on walls, are firmly rooted in the visual arts: painting, printing, photography, graphic design, assemblage, and sculpture. Speaking of the 70s, my husband Steve, everybody knows Steve, and I have lived at 44 Chaplain Street for 48 years. Yeah, and you look so young, Kathy. I do a lot of ad-libbing, and I can talk forever. So at any point, if you have a question or want to raise your hand about something, feel free to do so. We purchased our home in 1974. The Walter Goodall House, dated 1833 to 35, is a Greek Revival style house which is across the street from the Congregational Church and to the left of the Gurley Tavern, which is where Ruth lived. In 1835, Isaac Goodall sold the property, which included a house and store, to his brother Walter. When asked, where's Chaplin? Our response is usually 7 miles from Yukon and 7 miles from Willimantic. My husband and I retired from the university many years ago. We raised our 3 children in Chaplin, Jason, Benjamin, and Tiffany, and I was 29 when I moved to Chaplin, and Ruth was 39 in 1934 when the diaries were written. So I'm just giving you the idea of a young woman living her life in her 30s, not in her 80s or 90s when she passed away.
Kathy, was she married?
Yes, yep. So try to think of Ruth as a young woman as you read the printed diary entries on the sheets provided on each table, okay? Note, 1934 was arguably one of the worst years of the Great Depression. As the world's economy hit rock bottom, as the situation seemed hopeless, more and more people turned to whoever promised them a better life. So it's interesting when you read the dialogue from 1934, there really isn't much referencing the Depression. Okay, so it was really a daily life kind of diary. As the situation seemed hopeless, more and more people turned to whoever promised them a better life. At this time in history, the rising leaders used people's fears and prejudices to rally support and create a scapegoat for the world's problems. Sound familiar? Yeah. Did you know that Bonnie and Clyde were killed on May 23rd, 1934? There's no mention of that in the diaries. Okay, so again, it's just a daily life. How I came to own the diaries. That's what everybody wants to know. This is the box that started it. This box of stuff was given to me by the person who bought the Gurley Tavern after Ruth died in 1983. The box, which had been stored in the attic, contained some of what I am now showing you today. The person who bought the Ruth Snow Bowen home, sometimes known as the quilt shop, thought that I would like all this stuff. I'm sure you have received boxes just like that. I thanked the giver of the box and put it in the attic for safe keeping. Years later, after our 3 children had moved out and taken their stuff with them, the American Girl dolls, the Star Wars, the Ninja Turtles, I decided to attack the attic and purge. I unpacked the Ruth Snow Bowen box, which is what I had called it. This is not the exact box, but a replica of it. So you get the idea of what I got. So I decided to attack the attic and purge. I unpacked the Ruth Snow Bowen box and realized there were pictures, cards, school notebooks, and important documentation, what Ruth did on a daily basis. So I'm going to bring this over here just to give you the idea. So hey Peggy, I got something for you. You like this box? So, there's the little miscellaneous fabrics, and what I did with all of the schoolwork that she had done is I then put things in a book. So there's lots of writing that Ruth did, and stories, and all kinds of things. So I'm going to just pass this around. You can look at it at your leisure. This was in the box as well, but not organized in a school stuff folder. Lots of other paperwork. And again, I'm going to put these out on display afterwards so that you can look at them. They're all in plastic, so just leave them in the plastic. And please share and look at them. And if you have questions, feel free to ask a question. So anyways, where's the box? Oh no, I need the box back. Nobody said you could take the box. Hey, you can get it later, okay? So here's what I found. These are the diaries. And I'm gonna leave them in this plastic thing, and I'll pass it around. Steve will check you before you leave to make sure you don't take them with you. But feel free to just open them up carefully, and you can see the writing of what was done on a daily basis. It's a 5-year diary, so that on May 6th in 1934, whatever year it was, she entered one line. Then at May 6th the next year, she entered another line. And May 6th the following year, for 5 years. So you could look back for 5 years and see what had happened on that day. The chickens laid eggs, they went to the church, whatever.
Kathy,
Yes,
it's interesting that somebody would write just one line when one has such a full,
oh, I can't hear you.
it's interesting as one would write just one line when one has so many things happening in a day. And so I'm wondering whether she had particular advanced schooling, or whether she was just a very intelligent person who knew how to parse things well and
Okay, so that, Julie, is a great question. Because, like you're assuming, I'm assuming that they're Ruth's diaries, okay? But they're not. So as I look further into what they're telling me, I realized that these were Ruth's mother's diaries, not Ruth. Ruth's mother recorded what happened in their house on a daily basis. And I had a picture of what happened to it, of her, but I'll find it. But anyways, so that's, here it is. So this is Ruth's mother, Laura Snow, and she recorded everything that they did in just a one-sentence kind of thing. And when I realized that, I just thought, wow. She also recorded visitors that came to the quilt shop in order to buy or purchase quilts or other things, because again, Ruth was a young businesswoman, when you think about it, and she would make handkerchiefs and she would make other things. So once somebody showed up to buy a quilt and they weren't going to buy the quilt, she sold them something else out of her home. And her mother recorded that.
Her mother sewed too, right?
What?
Her mother sewed too.
Her mother, and how do you know that?
And it says, Ruth did this and I have been sewing.
Right, so that's what she's doing. So here, I want you to participate a little bit. Bear with me, you have a card, okay? A little pink or blue card. And just write down what you did in 1 or 2 sentences, yesterday or today. What would you write? You can't remember. Thank God, we can't remember. My routine, I probably would write, I woke up, had my coffee,
Does anyone need a card?
turned on the news, and then started quilting. But yeah, what would you, if you had a 5-year diary and you were recording it every day, what would you say happened today? Keep in mind, if you look at the diary that's on the table, she started with the weather. There was an awful lot of pleasant weather in 1934. Yep.
Some of the pens have a knob on the top you have to pull off.
Yeah.
Because they're fresh.
Yeah.
Like the point.
Ah, I see.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
I
little
just rolled
plastic.
it.
Oh,
If it's not ready, just pull the.
Ruth also was a documenter, yes.
Was there anything in her diaries about the doll collection?
No, but we have pictures, and some of them are here. In fact, there may be one of those little black and white log cabin pieces on the table. There may be a picture of Ruth holding a doll. So if you have that one, hold it up. And again, I have to admit, I haven't had the time to sit down and read those diaries, okay? Remember the format that they're in when you look at it. Very small written words, page after page, it's very delicate. So what I did, and I'll talk about that later, is I had it typed up into a Word document so that I could read it and reflect on what was going on.
Her doll collection was dolls from everywhere.
And did you see this collection, or?
Yes, she showed me it. She told me about a lot of the dolls and where they came from. It was interesting. They were from all over the world.
And I know who you you are, but there are people here that don't know who you are. Tell us who you are and where you live.
I'm Rachel McDonald, I live at 87 Chaplin Street. And I'm the.
So
my
you were here when
great-grandchildren are
Ruth
the
was
eighth
here.
generation to live in the house.
Say that again?
My great-grandchildren are the eighth generation to be in the house.
Wow. That deserves a applause. So
My grandfather ran the store, and my great-grandfather made the boots that went in it.
Wow.
Rachel,
So-
you were a Phillips, right?
Yes.
And do you have
Do you have
diaries that you're writing for somebody else to share?
No, I didn't write anything yet, but
You should.
what did I write yesterday? I babysat yesterday for great-grandchildren. It was an extreme day, I was exhausted.
We know that feeling of like, oh God, let them go home. Get them out of here. But yeah, so anyways, that's really important to know that you know that she had all the doll collection, but I have some photos. And I did see some of her doll collection when she lived
Do
next
you
to
want
me.
another Ruth Bowen story?
Yes, tell us.
Okay, Ruth Bowen played the organ for the church. And there were times when, I don't know if in the winter, they went to her house, because the organ at our church was the same identical organ that was in her house.
Wow.
And, that woman could play an organ like you would not believe. It would have shattered your windows. But sometimes, if I wasn't left home alone, which didn't happen too often, my dad was in the choir, so he would take me to her house for choir rehearsal. And it was pretty cool to listen to everybody singing and practicing.
Yeah.
And when she was in the church, she would, hymns, that was it. But if there was a choir rehearsal at her house when it was done, and people left, there were some that hung out while she played polkas.
Oh, wow. So she had that energy to do
Oh my
that.
goodness, the one I remembered the most was the beer barrel polka. It was incredible. I mean, this woman could play like there was no tomorrow.
And she was good with her hands, so.
Yes, she was.
Yep, that's what she did. Wow. Anybody else have a quick Ruth Snow Bowen? Yes, Adley.
We moved here in '65, and I was pregnant again, and she was quite interested in anybody new, and so she took me through her house, and I saw before it was destroyed the ballroom on the second
Yeah,
floor
yeah.
with the sliding walls and
Yeah.
doors, and the Eye of God on the end ceiling,
Yeah.
a gable. I guess it was.
Yeah.
But I remember how proud she was of how beautiful that house was. And it was just lovely to meet someone who'd always been there, and she'd been the postmistress forever, too.
Right.
And she really knew everybody's business. I guess she read the postcards.
So I'm gonna pass this around. This shows Ruth with one of her dolls, and that was something that she always wanted you to see. And she was very proud of the staircase. I'm sure you got the tour where 7 brides came down the staircase.
Yes.
And she had a flag in her front hallway. And yesterday, we like to hang flags on our home, and so we ended up hanging up a flag on our side porch, just to commemorate Ruth. Thank you, Evelyn. Okay, so just quickly, let's, you received 3 things. You got a pen, you got a little card to write on, and then the other thing is my business card that you received. And if you have a story or something that you would like to share with me, and I can put it in all the stuff that we have on Ruth, just email me that information, or you can call me. Sometimes people like to leave their email address for me to get in touch with them, but I'm not doing that. So if you have something that you want me to know about, you have my contact information. And on the back of the card, Peggy, do you have my little card? Read what's on the back.
Nice.
Perfect, go.
Loose ends.
Loose ends, okay, so who else? What do you have?
Stitch your stress away.
What is it?
Stitch your
Stitch your stress away.
I got one that says a fat quarter is not a body part.
Yes, and everybody who sews
Don't
knows it.
needle the seamstress.
What?
Mine says don't needle the seamstress.
Yeah, don't need them to seamstress, so just trying to keep everybody thinking happy thoughts. What about, Diane, what do you have?
Life is short, buy the fabric.
Ah, yes, that's a motto that all quilters love. Life is short, buy the fabric. But anyways, if you can, would you just read me, Helen, what you wrote that you've done that was so exciting today? That you put in a diary?
Spent the day caring for our perennial gardens, many weeds, so many beautiful things.
Good, that sounds like something I would like to do. How about you?
I wrote pleasant weather.
Ah, good.
Fall and I cleaned up the brush and trees I cut down. We chipped the branches and used them as mulch on the raspberries. The larger branches were cut for kindling.
Wow. Johanna, how about you?
I didn't say much, I just said, worked in garden most of the afternoon as the weather was perfect.
Good, good. Sandy?
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
I said, went to the doctor in the morning with Gavin and worked at the library in the afternoon.
Great, great. All right, anybody have something they do want to share? Yes.
I went to a workshop with Juan Sanchez about lichens, and he said he knew this was happening. He said to say hello, but he also said Ruth Bowen used to babysit for him.
Wow.
1947.
Wow, when you're in town a long time, that's what happens. So Ruth really, yeah. She put Chaplin on the map as far as I'm concerned. You know, there are noteworthy people that came out of Chaplin, but in the quilt world and what everybody knows, and you can see from the articles that were written about her, she just had that drawer, and people wrote about her and visited her, and but anyways, just to go on to a little bit more about documenting what happened, Ruth also kind of did the same thing. So she kept a record of her quilts and where they went. And that's how I know that this quilt right here, number 269, is the last quilt that she took off her frame. So this was in a little booklet with some of her stuff. My two grandchildren, John Howard Bowen, age 18 years, and Susan Lynn Bowen, age 14 years, gave me this pen and 600-page book in which to write the record of my work with quilts. I don't know what happened to that book. It was not in my box, okay? But little parts of it were in the box. My mother taught me to sew at an early age of 4 years old. It worried her that I would not use a thimble. She said that all really good sewers considered them necessary. When I was about 16, the colored celluloid thimble were on the market. My mother bought a pink one for me. It was comfortable, others were not. Therefore, after I always used one. I made some quilts of which I seem to have kept no record of. A lady here in Chaplin, at the age of about 87 years old, told me in 1931 that she had pieced over 80 quilts. I was inspired by Mrs. Sarah Risley. People know the Risleys? Well, I was inspired by Mrs. Sarah Risley, and I set my goal for 100. So Ruth was a little competitive, right? This lady had done, you know, her number, and she was going to do more. So she was going to set her goal of 100. And actually she did. She got to 269. My mother, Laura M. Jones Snow, was a professional dressmaker. She could also quilt, but did not enjoy it particularly. I also received help from Ada Larrabee. Does anybody know Ada Larrabee, or the Larrabees?
Ada who?
Larrabee. An elderly lady who was from Wyndham Center who did quilts professionally. She told me that the pay was so small she could not earn her living, her bread and butter, doing them. But it did provide a way to earn some jam. Isn't that a typical thing that they would say? No bread and butter, but you could earn your jam. Before keeping records, I tried 3 times to make pink and green basket quilts for the twin beds in her son Bowen's room and my southwest second room bedroom. in the 1822 part. Each time someone wanted to buy, so I never did get mine. I made several quilts for everyday use, which Mama tied, sold 2 Lone Star, recorded them, and made everyday quilts for Hollis's room when he was small. So she references in this the Lone Star quilt. Just by chance, because I blog, and there's a couple of red books here, so instead of doing a daily, writing in a diary, during pandemic, I did blog posts every week to keep my sanity. And the red books that are there are my blog posts for part of last year. So every Friday or Thursday night, I would write something about what was happening in my studio and what was happening in the pandemic, and then I would send it out on my blog. And most of people mostly who got it were my friends and fellow fiber artists in Studio Art Quilt Associates. So it was kind of important to them, too, to keep in touch with us throughout Connecticut. So anyway, somebody must have read the blog, because I did receive this note from an Ann Bales. Dear Mrs. Smith, I was brought up in Bloomfield, Connecticut sometime in the early 1960s. My mother discovered Ruth Bowen's quilt shop and had this quilt made for me, and a grandmother's flower garden made for herself, and one for her sister. Unfortunately, the grandmother's flower garden that I have now was washed and is rather faded. However, the Texas Star had been in a cupboard for many years and is like new. I put it on my bed to give myself a burst of color during the rather dreary winter. It looks a bit cold as there is only one pillow at the top. However, I thought you would share the photo with you about reading about Ruth on your website, and others devoted to her. Ann Bales. So she sent me this email and a picture of the star quilt, which I don't know if that's what they're referencing in this, or whether it's being referenced in another part of what Ruth actually wrote about her quilts. So again, quilts, there's such a connection. I got in touch with this lady because I thought, I'll go drive to Bloomfield and I'll see the Ruth Bowen quilt, maybe offer to buy it, whatever. She lives in Canada now, so she's not in the area. So I'll try to stay in touch with her. Alrighty. Let's just go on. Anybody else want to tell us what you wrote or what you did? How about you, Dopey? Did you get a chance to write a little?
I got here really late.
Okay. All right, so that's the grandmother's flower garden quilt that I purchased for my mother. And just a little background on the grandmother's flower garden quilt. The pattern is one of the most beloved of all vintage quilt patterns. These old quilts can be found many places, but very few new ones are being made. It's a labor-intensive pattern that's usually pieced and quilted by hand. Grandmother's flower garden quilts evoke memories of the Great Depression of the 1930s, which we talked about. Many of our own grandmothers made one of these lovely quilts using scraps from their rag bags or scrap baskets. A quilt like this could be a cheerful reminder of a lovely flower garden and a much-needed lift during hard times. So, and again, I'll give you time to kind of look through these things on your own. Leslie Ricklin, who is not able to be here today, gave me this about a year ago because it was a paper that somebody at Eastern had done on Ruth Snow Bowen in an American folk art class. So again, it kind of documents Ruth. They took pictures of her when they visited her, and she referenced, and I have a picture of Ruth when they visited her and what was on her quilt frame at the time. So anyways, I'm going to just pass this around, and if you feel like looking it over, you go right ahead. And these are just some more samples of how the piecing was done. Everything is hand stitched. All of these little hexagon, I guess they're six-sided. What's a six-sided? Hexagon. It's a hexagon. They were all done by hand. And she had stacks of the fabrics. I think these were all pre-cut, and she ordered the little hexagons pre-cut. That's what I remember, because there were so many stacks of them. I think I remember her saying that she would get them pre-cut. And then she would sit there, and you can look at the back of it, and sew just the short little seam side to each one, and then sew it all together, and then spend hours quilting it.
Big stitches.
I know. This is the note that I received from Ruth after my father died. And after we decided to give my mother Ruth's last quilt. So this is in Ruth's handwriting. And again, this was 1978, October. My father passed away suddenly, October 12th, 1978, of a heart attack. And the reason I'm referencing my father is that to me, quilts always have a narrative, and my work is a narrative. And the series that I'm working on now is called Transfusion, and some of it started after my father passed away. It has a lot of reds, it has a lot of colorful work in it, and I've done about 13 pieces in that series. So unlike Ruth, who repeated the same thing over again with different colors, I tend to work in a series. So anyways, after my father passed away, Ruth was my neighbor, and she knew my mother, and she sent this nice note. My husband passed away in May 1948. We were married in October 1927. Our only son, because somebody asked if she had children, was in the U.S. Navy at the time. He was in Norfolk, Virginia. He was given a few days special leave to come home for the funeral. I was thankful that he was not sent overseas until later. There are many happy memories to think of. That does help. We used to play piano duets together. Do you remember that? The piano duets? No? And then she's best wishes to Mrs. Wall, my mother, and then she signs it from Ruth Snow Bowen, Chaplin, Connecticut, October 19th, 1978. And she also noted at that time, in 1978, that she was, so this was really important to her. She put inside the little note, I am now quilting number 258. So she was documenting, I'm gonna pass it around together, everything she did. Yes.
What do you think her time frame was to finish each quilt?
According to what I can figure out, she must have been doing at least 2 of them a year from that date to get to the next, to get to the 269. So that was in, what did I say,
78.
78. And so, yeah, to get to the point when she died, to have gotten to 269, which was a while before she passed away. And what I can remember from her, because remember, I was just young, new, I was had children, and so I was busy with my neighbors, like Ann Chook or other people, Diane, other people in town. I didn't spend a lot of time at Ruth's house, because she was a native in town, and she had her own life, and not a lot of visitors, but occasionally we would see each other, or when my mother came, we would go over. And if you know her house, she had a big quilt frame in the main room. And you walked right into that quilt frame, and that's what she did. Yes?
It says in the girl's paper from Easter, a quote from Ruth says, I do about 5 quilts a year.
Wow.
So it's
So
probably
I'm
varies.
glad you read that. I keep track of what Ruth did. That's a lot of quilting.
And it might, you don't know if they're this big and,
She pretty much did big bed quilts. Yeah, she did big bed quilts. Fiber artists today work much smaller. I'm one of the few fiber artists that work very large. And so it takes me a long time. I'm working on a piece that's like 70 by 70 now, and I'm a hand quilter. I don't quilt on a frame. I quilt with a hoop. And when I get up, just like your daily day is, I get up, I make sure Steve is not up, because he would bother me. And I go downstairs, I get the coffee or the oatmeal ready, And I then go into the living room to put on the news, and I sit there with my very large piece that I'm quilting, and I quilt for at least an hour before he comes down. And then if I'm working on something in my studio, which is large panels on a wall, because I do improvisational work, I'll go upstairs for maybe an hour or so before lunch, maybe 2 hours, to do the designing. And then come down for yogurt and fruit, right? That would be part of our daily day. And watch the news and quilt some more. But the piece, like I said, is very large, and I've been quilting that piece for, 3 or 4 months now. So, and Peggy knows that any handwork takes a lot of time if you're hand quilting. And I'm one of the few hand quilters today. Most quilters are doing beautiful machine work, but I just got into that meditative mode of quilting by hand, and I don't think I'll ever give it up. Okay, so we covered that, and the Lonely Star quilt. So as I mentioned, so I read the foreword, so you've had that. As I mentioned in that note that I just read, my quilts are a narrative. And after my father passed away, and then my sister did, and I'm not saying that, to make you feel sad or anything like that, I decided to make what I call my memories quilt. And that piece is hung there. And it has a dialogue, and what I did was I stitched strips of fabric. I also have a weaving background, so that's how I can connect with Peggy. And I stitched these strips of fabric, and I decided to write on it, just like a diary, what was important to me at that time. And on the top line, it says, "You look great. You do know how to skate. We all love you, Jason, Steve, Ben, and Tiffany." So it must have been after a skating event at UConn or something, and the kids wrote me something. So I found that, and I decided to put that. October 1st, 1986 is the next line, and that's my birthday, and my mother wrote to me, "Hope you have a wonderful day, and give my piece of cake to Tiff. Love, Mom." The third line down, "The peonies are 2 weeks behind schedule. I'm sure your yard is gorgeous. Enjoy. Love, Kathy." So that was something that I wrote to my mother, because she had a beautiful yard of peonies in New Hampshire. And then, as I mentioned, my sister passed away, and in the next line is something that she wrote, and we all hear at a funeral. "I'd like the memory of me to be a happy one, of happy times and laughing times." And that was from my sister Bernice. And then I did include the note from Ruth. "My husband passed away in May 1948. We were married in October 1927. There are many happy memories." And then number 6 is another memory. "Steve and I went to Maine for a few days. It was nice to get away, and I missed the boys, Jason and Ben." Number 7, "May the joy of marriage to each other increase in the years ahead, filled with love and peace." That was from my mom and dad. And then, I don't know if you remember Barbara Lucier, who's a painter who lived in town, who's a very good friend of mine. And I guess I was stressing about what to do with all the stuff in the attic, and she said, she wrote me a note, "Forget about cleaning out the attic and get to things that are really important, like quilting." And at the time, she was living in Saipan with her husband, and so she wrote, "Love to everyone, Barb." So that's what I wrote on those lines, and then I wove them into what I call my memories quilt. Anybody have anything they want to add? We've got time. Another thing that she did was this little booklet that was in the box. "Why should turtles be pitied? Because theirs is a hard case. Why should young ladies set good examples? Because young men are so apt to follow them. Why is Ireland Ireland, likely to become the richest country in the world, because its capital is always Dublin. Get the play on words. When are fingernails, and I'm gonna get you to answer this one, when are fingernails like law documents? When are fingernails?
When they're filed.
Yay! You get the prize for the How are you? Yay! See, you've been paying attention. What is the difference between a man and a camel? A camel can work 8 days without drinking, and a man can drink 8 days without working. Why is a schoolboy like a postage stamp? Because he gets licked and put in a corner? I'll do one more. But so she had a sense of humor. It's got her little name on this book. Why are crockeryware dealers different from other merchants? Yes, because it won't do for them to crack up their goods. Anyways, anybody have like some questions or comments? Because I want to get into the
Just a comment on
quilt.
the school board,
What?
that she means a board.
Oh,
That
yes.
was whacked the kid.
Yeah, yep, pass
Those
that
are
around
the
if anybody.
dates changed.
Right. Okay.
Kathy, I don't know if you'd want to do it now, but,
Yeah.
I'm fortunate, and maybe some of you are as well, that I also have a quilt belonging to Mrs. Bowen. And if, I will get it out if you'd like to see it
Yep.
later, I'll lay it out. But, it's sort of fabulous when you think that she did every one of them by hand. And when she gave it to you, she put the poem was always in it.
Yep.
I don't know if, the poem doesn't have much poetic value.
Oh, no, read the poem.
But it's a great tribute. I can't, I think you should.
Okay.
But you also might want to read, this is what she wrote to me.
Okay.
I don't see well enough.
This
You
is the
do,
poem, The
Kathy.
Quilt Enthusiast, and you may have heard it, but I'm going to read that first. In the big white house on Main Street lives a lady quite petite. She plies her needle night and day and feels it's quite a treat. She set the quota just at 100 to piece and tie the quilts. So far, she's pieced just 42 and feels a sort of guilt. She's quilted, oh yes, 95 for folks all around the town. They're pieced in every pattern, colors pink, red, yellow, and brown. She cooks and keeps her house so clean. She knits, crochets, and tats. She's edged 1,000 hankies. I have one of those too, I'll show you. Now, what do you think of that? She will sell you pretty postcards, any kind you like. Her fingers fly over piano keys. I'll bet she can ride a bike. If you want a pretty picture of a favorite spot in town, just give to Ruth your order. She'll gladly write it down. On Sunday, there is time for church. There is time for a friendly smile. That is what makes life worth living and shortens the longest mile. Now, when she goes to bed at night, she sets the old alarm. She goes out at 3 in the morning to guard the town against harm. All I can say is she is faithful no matter what her task. To have her patience and faithfulness is all anyone could ask. If I've omitted anything, I gladly leave this space for any word you wish to add. Now is the time and place. And it was done by Helen Snedeker. Is that-
And it's not a great poem, but it's a great tribute.
And it was done in May of
And
1942.
quilt that she made.
And now, because I've seen so much of her writing, I immediately, without even knowing it's Ruth writing,
You would have known
I
it
know.
was.
This poem was written about Mrs. Ruth Snow Bowen of Chaplin, Connecticut, 38 years ago, by the late mother of Reverend Rodney D. Snedeker, former pastor of the Congregational Church at Woodstock Hill. This blue grandmother's flower garden is number 264, so she's getting to the end of it, because I
Yes,
got
she is.
269.
Oh, do you think it's a 6? Because she's redone it.
I think it's a 6,
Okay.
but yeah. which she has done. They have gone to many different states. This is for Mrs. Johanna Philbrook of Chaplin, Connecticut. Don't lose this, ever. And can you take out your quilt? Yeah, Steve can help her? Yeah.
And as I say, it is the quilt that's hanging, but it will give you a chance to see it in a different color.
And while they're getting that out, I'm going to just, what I did to kind of get into the work of the, what Ruth's mother was saying, I took 1 month, which was May of 1934, and I wrote it on this calendar. And it made me really get into what was happening every day, because I wrote it and then I internalized it. And the mother references the son as being a good boy, like, Hollis was a good boy today, blah, blah, blah. And I wondered why she kept referencing that. Well, Ruth and her husband had been away. And so, oh my God, that's gorgeous. Wow.
Hey Kathy, how do you preserve the colors so well?
How do I? Well, I keep it in a cedar chest, except when I have some very special company.
Oh God, I love it.
The colors are so pretty.
That is amazing. I would like to have a dog, I'll buy it.
Isn't that? So can you imagine doing, she just didn't do 269 quilts. She did 269 grandmother's flower garden quilts. And as we noted here, that's not a very easy pattern to do because of all the piecing and all the handwork that she did.
Right, think of the size of the pieces, and I'm old enough that I actually sat there and watched her when she was making it for me.
Excuse me, can you hold it up a little higher so I can take a picture? Perfect. Good, thank you.
It's good.
And did you,
It's heavy.
and did
You
you,
don't know it.
if you ever want to sell it, it's probably an heirloom in your family, but if you ever want to sell it, let me know.
When you would buy a quilt from her, did you request a color palette, or you just let her?
I didn't, because I could tell by her age she wasn't gonna make many more. And my mother's birthday was coming up, so the pink one, when she was getting it off, I said, does anybody want it? I will buy it from you. So that's why.
And what about you? Did you ask for colors?
I did. I went and as I told them, I don't know if you heard me, I'm old enough that I actually sat there and we chose some of the colors.
Oh.
And to me, it was just fabulous. Every little piece of that was done by hand.
Did you watch her
And
work on the loom?
She wasn't young anymore when she did that.
Right, right.
Did you get to watch her work on the loom?
Yes, I did. I sat with
With
her.
it horizontal?
On the frame.
Yeah, in the frame, right.
We think we might have her frame. We're not sure. A while back, the church was cleaning out some of their buildings in back, and they came up with these wooden pieces that look to me like a quilting frame. Everything doesn't seem to quite fit right, but at some point, we're gonna take it out and see if we can set it up. And I think later in the year, when they do one of the walks, Peggy or I were gonna try to do something. Yeah, so I'm gonna try to see if I can put something on that frame. But again, I don't work on a frame. I work on it with a small hoop. Even with big pieces, I use this size hoop. So that is just gorgeous. I love the colors. And as far, what Rusty asked about the fading, today's fabrics, like that piece, I have a front hall where I hang a lot of my work and I change them out. But the fabrics today don't fade that much. And I don't even think that piece, I know my mother had it on her bed and everything,
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of fading
Right.
in terms of the commercial dyes that these fabrics are made from. So,
I'd just like to mention that, because I think it's quite fabulous. Peggy Church has a quilt here that is not only relevant as a quilt, but it's also relevant to the bicentennial
Right.
coming up.
So Peggy, you're next.
Okay. Over in the cemetery, there's a stone in memory of Morris Church II. And we kind of wondered who he was. We thought he was some sort of a cousin. So I looked in the family Bible, Morris Church the elder, I looked in the family Bible, and he wasn't there, this Morris Church. I looked over at Town Hall, and he wasn't there. I checked with Rachel, and he wasn't brought to the church to be baptized. When the census taker came to the door in 1850, there was a little boy, 5 years old, named Morris Church. How did that happen? Well, we can guess how it happened. Also living in the house was a 25-year-old woman named Eunice Church. When Morris was 16, he went to Willimantic and he signed up for the Civil War. And we have a letter from Ship Island that he wrote, and he described how the company doctor got dysentery and his body was shipped home in a cast thing of brandy. Well, he subsequently died of dysentery as well, and he's in Louisiana somewhere. So the stone is just a memory stone. So we looked at the census to see, well, who was in the house at the time? Where did this little boy come from? And 5 years before, when he was born in 1845, Eunice was 20. And we know that Eunice was jilted at the altar. We still have Eunice's trousseau dishes, flow blue, pretty dishes, and Eunice was a quilter. She never married. And we assume that Eunice was his mother. And she did this in 1899 in March. It's Mariner's Compass. And she died that December in 1899. And this is one of her quilts. We think probably all the quilts left in the house were done by her. And we discovered something when we showed this at another similar event. We discovered that, and this is not in fine condition, the way Joey's is.
Tag on it, too.
You see the blue square?
Yeah.
That has to do with the Civil War. And that is in memory of her son, who died in the Civil War. So apparently that became a custom for quilt makers to include a square of blue that doesn't really fit with anything.
I know some of you may be interested, as I am fascinated to see that it's loaned by Mildred Church.
This was at an exhibit up at the museum. She also wrote another tag here, Centennial Quilt made by Eunice Church of Chaplin for the 1876 Centennial Celebration. Eunice Church was a great-great-aunt of Bernard M. Church, who was town clerk and treasurer of the town of Chaplin for 52 years, loaned by Mildred Church. So this was used. You can tell. It's kind of worn and
That style of quilt a lot of time becomes a signature quilt, where that middle block, they
there
will
is
have
a
somebody.
signature. I just looked for one.
Right, but what they do is they would get like notables in the area, and every person writes their name on the block.
This says 1876 Centennial,
Yep.
which I never noticed before.
Yep, and so that's what they do, and
So-
then lots of times they're raffled off, because
Ah.
they have signatures of important people on them.
Yeah. You can see some of the fabrics have just disintegrated and gone away. We just keep it in a blanket chest.
See cotton here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cotton batting.
Wow. And the back is still in good shape. which is-
So she never married. She lived in the house, and she died in 1899. Her brother bought her out of the estate for $200. I have the deed. So that's Eunice's story. God bless her. She was had a sad life. And Morris is buried in Louisiana. There we go.
Where is his memory stone? Is it next door, Peg?
It's the first one. As you go in the cemetery, the lane on the left, it's the first flag on the left. You can visit him on, well, he's not there.
I think Ann too brought up these too.
I did.
one just like that hanging in our hallway right now.
More traditional
And then
work.
this, I know nothing about this quilt. This was a quilt I found at a jag sale. I should have brought my signature quilt that I made for my mother. I never made a quilt in my life, but I made a quilt for my mother. And it was a signature quilt. This is a crazy quilt. Yeah, this is a built, this is probably around 20s, I think.
Yep.
And it's hand quilted, but, I don't know who quilted it or.
And what did you pay for it?
But I didn't write everything down that I did every day, so.
Yes, you should have wrote down that you bought a quilt. So did you, I'm looking at this, the fabrics are in great shape, but you used this, wasn't this on Lauren's bed or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the fabrics hold up.
Yeah, they were holding up.
Yep. It's the older, silk quilts, the crazy quilts that were made from silk, and because silk has like a salt in it from the way it's produced from the silkworms, that the salt deteriorates the fabric and the fibers. And that's why you see crazy quilts that have all this disintegration in them, whereas
This looks
cotton
like-
wouldn't do it
This
that way.
kind of looks like fabric from the 40s, maybe.
Yep. Yeah, right. Wow.
I wonder how, during the Second World War, I remember the ragmen coming around and getting, all our scraps and pieces from home. And, I mean, we saved, tin cans and lids, lard from the cooking. I mean, everything was recycled then because we just didn't have enough stuff. And, I was wondering if it had affected quilting, because you wouldn't have had so many scraps around.
Right, right. Does anybody else have a quilt that they brought or a story? We're looking at our hourglass. It's time to leave the studio soon. I want to thank the Bicentennial Committee for the picture of Ruth's house in the calendar, because this is what her house looked like when I came. And she used to be out, she was like checking out the new neighbors, I think. And she used to go out front and pretend to be playing with her roses. I would have to come out and, say something to her or whatever. So in closing, we can just come and look at things and talk about more about what's going on. But I do want to encourage you. Okay. I do want to encourage you that each month I'm changing the quilt. I think next month in the library I'm going to do what was the old Grange. Do you remember the Grange?
Yeah.
And now it's this beautiful blue color.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I'm working on now. And I hand quilt all my work, and I hand quilt from the back of the piece. So if you ever get to look at my new work, you need to look at the back of, and I have a couple pieces there of how I quilt. So in parting for now, and then we can just meander around and have snacks, I wanted to read this note that was in the box, which somebody had asked me about how it went from the little block books to the Word document. One of my good friend's daughter was home for the summer and she needed to make some money. So I paid her to type up all those little diaries over her summer break. And I was so thankful because now it was in a readable format, which before it was not. So, and I have it, on my computer as in a Word document. So, and I did print out most of it. Of all the girls that ever I knew, I never saw one that I thought would do. I wanted a wife that was nice and neat, that was up to the date, and that had small feet. I wanted a wife that was loving and kind, and that hadn't too much original mind. I wanted a wife that could cook and sew, and that wasn't eternally on the go. I wanted a wife that just loved to keep house, and that wasn't too timid to milk the cows. I wanted a wife that was strikingly beautiful, intelligent, rich, and exceedingly dutiful. That isn't so much to demand in a wife, but still she's not found, though I've looked all my life. This was in the box of stuff from Ruth. It's Ruth's handwriting, so I don't know, but it was my husband that wrote it. That's what Steve wrote it. And then finally, this is my little, because we all have to do it, right? Clean our attics. It may not seem important now, but there will be a time when your friends, children, grandchildren, and neighbors might be the recipient of the attic box. What will they learn from that box? More importantly, what do you want them to remember? You are important, and what you do is important. Remember that. Okay? Is it snack time now? I did during the pandemic. It's a series called Hey, Keep Your Distance, and I did 13 of them. And all of my photo images are from the farmlands around here. And that's something that Ruth didn't have access to. You know, with technology now, I can take photos, I can print them on fabric, and I can do whatever I want with my work. And this other one here, which I started mounting my work, is from the corn crib at Joshua's Trust. So I did that years ago. And again, it's not quilt-like because you can't feel it, but I've mounted a lot of my work, and it makes it easier for people to hang them. So that's that. Any other comments or?
Yeah. What do you do with all the quilts you make?
Right now, I've sold many over the years, but right now I'm in collecting mode. And so I'm collecting that series that I referenced called the Transfusion series. There's about 17 or 18 pieces in that, and I will probably do a show of that particular, of those pieces. So I won't sell them. I will get the whole body of work appraised and pass it on to our children. They'll be so happy to get the box. And then this whole series, the Tying Up the Hay series, I show it, there's a lot of art shows in Connecticut that I show my work at, and I price everything, but honestly, I overprice it because I really don't want to sell anything. And my work has been appraised, and some of you went to see my Quilt National piece down in Mystic, and that, that just is thousands and thousands of hours, and it would be thousands and thousands of dollars. So I'm really looking at creating a body of work that I can have appraised as something that will be passed on to my children. So I'm not looking to sell. Helen?
Well, I wanted you to mention that you were selected for that show, and I'm not sure everybody knows about the national one.
Well,
that's quite an honor.
It is an honor. It's Quilt National started in the 70s when the art quilt movement started, and it was started by an artist called Nancy Crow, and she had the idea that she was going to convert out in Ohio an old dairy barn into a quilt venue and to promote art as a quilt form. And this was the 70s, and people were starting to look at quilts on walls, like the Whitney Museum that I referenced. And that started SAQA, Studio Art Quilt Associates, which is an international group. And Quilt National every year, or every other year, has a show of high-end fiber art quilts. And fortunately, and I have applied, I think, 8 or 9 times. Every other year I'd come up with something that I thought, well, this will get into Quilt National. This is the one. And I'd get the, oh, thank you, but letter. So finally, right, Steve? So finally, and as part of my transfusion series, I did get accepted. And because of COVID last year, I wasn't able to fly out to Athens to go to the Quilt National exhibit. They get almost 1,000 entries. They make lots of money, and they pick 80 pieces out of like 1,000 entries, okay? So it is really different fiber art. And they decided to, they make a lot of money off of it. They're smart. Quilters are not dumb. And what they do is they travel the show into what they call collections. And they make $3,000 to $4,000 a month to send it to a venue. And they do that. So when you make your piece and you get into Quilt National, you give up the rights to that piece for 3 years. And you cannot ever show the piece before you enter Quilt National. So it's all new, fresh, within the last 3 years. And you do, as an artist, give up the rights to that piece because most shows want work that's current. So I can't do anything more with my Quilt National piece unless I have my own show. Because by the time I get it back, I can't enter it in any other show. Okay? So they've marketed themselves pretty good. But
But it'll
people,
go around a number of other places.
it'll go around to
Right.
other places and it will be seen. By chance, it went to the Mystic Museum, and I got a note from Amelia, my friend there, that said, we're getting it for mid-February to mid-March to mid-April. And by chance, when they opened up the box, my piece was in it. And they know my piece because of my signature style. So when they saw this red piece, they knew it was mine. And so they got in touch with me. And I already knew that because Quilt National had told me where it was going. And so it hung there. And because I quilt from the back, they hung the piece in the middle of the museum so that you could walk around the back and see the design lines on the back, which is like a bullseye pattern. And I'll pass, this is the piece. You can see me standing in front of it. So did I answer the question? I don't know. I'm just saying is that, yeah, I'm keeping my work because this is part of a whole collection. Right now,
And how do you keep it?
I roll it up
Uh-huh.
and I have big bags that I put some of it in. Because I have back issues from all the quilting, the last piece I did was called Back Pain, and it has images of skeletons in it, and photo images, and that just won a prize up at the Monson Art Council. So I can make money getting prizes. That was like $500, so I shared that with Peggy. So I can make some money on my quilts by showing them if I win a prize, but I'm not ready to sell that piece, because it's part now of this collection called
Yeah.
Transfusion. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it's hard to part with something you put so many
Right.
hours into.
Right. And there is a pretty good market for well-known fiber artists, but I'm not that well-known, and so it would be, I would have to die, and then my body of work, right dear?
That could be arranged.
Would be, like, I'm thinking about Nancy Crow, the one who started Quilt National. She is about my age, maybe just a little older, and her work, I can't imagine when she passes on and any of her work gets put up for sale or auction, it's in the $200,000, $300,000 range at this point. So, and the young, which I appreciate, the young fiber artists of today, there's a wonderful woman called Bisa Butler that does images of her photos from her family album, and they're just incredible. And she's just started. She's in at least the $200,000 range for her pieces. So,
But see, now
there's
that
a
you
market
made it
out
to
there.
Quilt National, you'll be more well.
Well, that's why, when that piece, I think I appraised it at $6,000 when I sent it off. When it comes back, I'll have it appraised again, and because of where it's been, it's gonna be worth a lot more. Nobody's gonna buy it, but don't break into my house. You know where I live. Go ahead.
Kathy, I'm very impressed that anyone can quilt as many hours a day and as many years as you and so many others have done. Is there sort of a natural selection of people whose hands would just never make it and those who have that?
Good point. I don't know, you know? I've always done things with my hands. I can remember being 6 or 7, waking up and asking my mother to teach me how to knit with my little needles, waking her up, and I knew how to knit, but I didn't know how to do the reverse, the purl stitch. So she taught me how to do that, and I garden. I'm always doing something with my hands. So I think that's part of, who you are. You just like to do things. And I'm a process person. I never want to know what my work that I'm doing now will look like when it's done. It's very improvisational. I work with big panels. I throw the fabric up there, and then I start to cut and work it through. So there's no drawing out of the piece and doing that. That's why I could not ever do that. It would be too tedious for me because I already know what it's going to look like. Whereas my work right now is that's why Ian referenced that little basket thing, because that we knew what it was going to look like. This whole group of us that did the chaplain school quilts, we knew. I still have my t-shirt.
Well, we didn't know what the kids' one was gonna look like, that was the second one.
Yeah, that was the second one. But we knew what we were doing, but we still were duplicating what the students had done just randomly. We didn't tell them what to do. It was just,
Yeah.
And
Yes.
we
At
still
my
don't
school,
know
there is a
really-
quilt.
Excuse me?
You go first.
I'm sorry. There was still one house that was done, the kids drew their houses, and then we picked out of the 200 which houses were gonna go on the quilt. And there was one pumpkin house, and we just still don't know who lived there and where it was.
Right,
Remember
we
the
never
pumpkin
found out,
store?
right. And then I'm gonna bore you, because we really do need to have some lemonade. I'm gonna bore you with one more detail. This is the thing that changed fiber art, the rotary cutter. And now if you have a rotary cutter, but in the 70s, I was not going to cut out my lines with the scissors, which what Ruth did or fiber artists did. That once this was invented in the 70s, called the rotary cutter, my work has improvisational slashing in it. So I could create that background and then decide, oh, I think I want a line there, you know? Because again, I don't know what the piece is going to look like until I'm done. And then I would take what was almost a finished piece and then just take my rotary cutter and go right through it and insert another line. So I'm destroying my work as I create it with this. And I could not be a fiber artist without my rotary cutter.
Is it powered or is it like a pizza?
Excuse me?
It's like a pizza cutter.
Yes, it's sharp. And I have slashed myself many times, you know, where my hand is here, and I've just gone like that and went right through my finger. I've done that. My granddaughters like to go to my studio, and I don't let them. I have this under kind of lock and key, because they have to learn how to use a scissors first, no rotary cutter, because I know what can happen. I mean, I've lost the tip of my finger many times, because, you know.
Did Colin want to say something?
Oh, yeah, and then he had a question, right? You had a
Yeah.
question?
I had a comment.
Yeah.
There is this crazy quilt at my school. It's a patchwork quilt, and everybody made one square and put them all together, and it's been there even before I came to that school.
Wow,
And
and
I
what
think
school
it's
are you
beautiful.
at?
Chaplain Elementary.
Oh, you're at the elementary school. Oh, we love the elementary school.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
The one with red bricks?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
Probably at both.
If you go into the elementary school and there's some pictures of two young children digging the dirt for the school, one of them is my daughter Tiffany, and the other is Chris Bray.
Well, I don't know really, but
Yep.
there's a giant
But that was like 30 years ago.
Long time ago.
Definitely
Yeah.
changed
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It's hard to leave Chaplin, so stay here, right? Oh, right. Yep. And Rusty also left some of the handbooks that he so put together. So if anybody needs the booklet of the houses on the street and maybe more walking tours, and thank you.
Thank you.
It's just an hour.
Yeah.
Time to go back to my studio and do that.
Please help yourself to some snacks.
Anyway, and feel free to look at what's on